Can you be the GOAT without ever having played a single minute of professional basketball? You genuinely have to be great to even have this be a conversation to start with. We hear all the time about players who never got a real opportunity to play on the biggest stage or just didn't work out in the long run for whatever reason. And there's no such things as guarantees in sports, as we know, but Cheryl Miller may be the greatest player to never play pro basketball, but also has a real argument to be the greatest women's player of all time. My name is Caleb, and seeing Cheryl Miller at the USC women's game a few weeks ago, watching a generational talent in Juju Watkins begin to cement her own basketball legacy, it just reminded me of how much Miller paved the way for future generations of women's hoopers, and how much we really missed out on her never being able to play pro hoops. Even though she is widely considered the greatest women's player ever, a basketball Hall of Famer, and Reggie Miller's big sister, I still think that her story is severely undertold. I'm not sure if people truly realize how insane it is that she can have a greatest of all time resume without ever stepping foot on a professional court. Today, I want to talk about the basketball career that Cheryl Miller had and the alternative route she took after her playing days were over. Make sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this, and with that being said, let's jump in. California has always been a hotbed for high school basketball. Some of the greatest players we've ever seen made a name for themselves during their prep days on the West Coast, and because iron sharpens iron, they were going head to head against each other. And because the talent pool is so potent, it's not abnormal for there to be multiple great athletes to come out of a single family. In Cheryl Miller's case, she wasn't just competing with hoopers around Riverside, but also her own siblings. She was the middle of 5 siblings, and as the middle child, you have both people to look up to and someone looking up to you. In 1979, her older brother Daryl will be drafted to the MLB, and after 4 years of college baseball at Cal Poly Pomona, he'd spend 4 years in the majors with the California Angels. Her younger brother Reggie, the greatest player in Pacers franchise history, will become a basketball Hall of Famer in his own right. And though they'd both become local legends in their hometown of Riverside, California, Cheryl was the one who became one of those figures in sports whose legacy will probably never be touched. Her high school career at Riverside Polytechnic was more than likely one of the first of its kind. We're so used to the 5-star freshman now and how college offers can come in at such an early age, and Miller was making national headlines in the late 70s and early 80s, which high school players just weren't doing as much back then. As she shot up to 6'2" as a freshman, she was named a Parade Magazine All-American, something she'd repeat for the next 3 years of her high school career. The first high school player, male or female, to accomplish that feat. Throughout her 4-year high school career, she put up averages of 32 points and 15 rebounds, with a single season high of 37.5 points per game, on her way to 4 straight CIF Southern Section championships, the equivalent of a state championship in most other places. Obviously, with that type of dominance, you're probably going to shatter every single record to that point, and as essentially the most unstoppable women's player ever already as a teenager, she set the records for both points in a single season and a high school career, as well as becoming the first women's basketball player on record to dunk in actual competition. During her senior year in the 1981-82 season, she'd have a wilt-type game, and it's not even an exaggeration. On January 26, 1982, she scored 105 points in a single high school basketball game. Keep in mind, high school basketball games are only made of 8-minute quarters and 32 minutes of total game time, meaning she was scoring about 3 points per minute. And the fact that there was no 3-point line at the time makes it all the more impressive. Just last year, Sue Bird and Diana Taurasi asked her about that game during their ESPN show, and Miller implied that she probably could have had more because she didn't play the last 2 minutes of their 179-15 win. If that wasn't enough to convince every major college program in the country that Cheryl Miller was almost guaranteed to hang national championship banners in their arena, then I don't know what was. She became, to this day, the most recruited female athlete of all time in any sport, receiving over 250 offers from schools across the country. And all those offers were nice, obviously, but Cheryl valued staying close to home and near her tight-knit family. Chiseling down over 250 offers to just 2, her top 2 choices were the 2 Los Angeles powerhouses. Her college decision at the time was none to maybe only Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's a couple of decades earlier, just to show you how big a deal this was. Ultimately, it came down to a pep talk from USC's twin superstars, Paula and Pamela McGee. 2 of the greatest women's players ever in their own right had just led USC to a Final Four appearance in 1981 and convinced Cheryl to come to USC in the spirit of competition. According to Cheryl, she said that the twins told her that you can spend the next 2 years playing with us or against us. And that was entirely enough for her to become the next woman of Troy in the fall of 1982. USC women's basketball had only been established in 1976 as they were the first D1 women's program to give out scholarships. Only 6 years later, and USC was one of the premier women's basketball programs in the country and were looking to make another deep run in the tournament in 1983. Now with a freshman Cheryl Miller and another notable freshman in her own right, Cynthia Cooper, this team was looking to become really the first iconic women's program in the history of college basketball. Cheryl Miller was probably the first superstar freshman in women's college basketball history, and if NIL was around back then, she probably would have made an obscene amount of money as a 19-year-old college kid. The transition from high school to college seemed pretty seamless as she led the Trojans in scoring at 20 points a game to go along with just under 10 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 3.5 steals, and 2 blocks a game, and there were one of 2 favorites to win the national championship that year. The other favorites, the defending national champion Louisiana Tech Lady Techsters, led by All-American Janice Lawrence and current LSU head coach Kim Mulkey. USC cruised all the way to the 1983 national championship game with only 2 losses on their resume the entire year, meeting Louisiana Tech with an almost identical record. In just the second ever women's national title game, it was a back and forth affair that came down to the absolute wire. With 9 seconds left, Kim Mulkey would commit an offensive foul with a chance to tie the game, and USC would hang on for a 2-point win and their first natty. Miller had 27 and 9 and ended her season as an All-American, the tournament's most outstanding player, and a national champion. Her sophomore year in 1983-84 would be a lot more of the same, upping her points per game average and leading USC to another NCAA tournament as a 1 seed to defend their title. After rattling off 3 straight tournament wins, they'd have a rematch with Louisiana Tech in the first game of the Final Four, this time beating them by 5 to reach the national championship game for the second year in a row. The 1984 USC Trojans would be up against the Tennessee Lady Vols and their legendary head coach Pat Summitt, who stood in the way of a second championship banner. With this year's Final Four taking place at UCLA's Pauley Pavilion, USC had a chance to win a championship on their greatest rival's home floor, but it wasn't going to come easy. Just like the game in the previous year, it was close, with USC trailing by 2 at the half, but a second half Cheryl Miller takeover along with the McGee twins helped USC come back and pull away with an 11-point win and a second championship in 2 years. Miller would lead all scorers with 27 and was once again named the tournament's most outstanding player and an All-American, but maybe her greatest individual honor this season was her winning her first Naismith Player of the Year. Typically after the season is over, most college players take a small break, but then it's right back to work during the summer to prepare for the next season. In Cheryl Miller's case, she was also prepping for her junior season, but she was going to become an Olympian in the meantime and didn't have to leave home to become one. The 1984 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles was going to be an opportunity for Cheryl Miller and the rest of the U.S. women's basketball team to showcase how far the game had come on a global stage. Cheryl was by far and away the best player, but that didn't always come with special treatment. Turns out, the US women's head coach would just happen to be the same head coach she beat in the 1984 national championship game, Pat Summitt. Summitt was known to be a traditional, no-nonsense coach, which 100% contributed to her being one of the greatest coaches of all time. But back in the mid-80s, when she was still building her legacy, her and Cheryl butt heads during the Olympics. An exhibition game before the Olympics began saw Cheryl have an uncharacteristically bad game where she was benched by Summitt in the second half, and Summitt let her hear about it. In a one-on-one conversation they'd have a few days later, Summitt let Miller know that she could win a gold medal without her. But Miller didn't fully believe that. After Summitt asked her what she thought about it, Miller told her that she won't win a gold medal without her. Miller claimed that she had gave it her all every day, and Summitt, while she didn't necessarily disagree, gave Miller what she needed to hear. "Yeah, you might be right," Summitt responded, "but I need you to be the best player on the planet. You're already the best player in the country. I need you to be the best player in the world." At that point, Cheryl had put in tons of work on her game, but she realized her natural talent was only going to get her so far. From then on, she stepped up as a leader, took practices to the next level, and led Team USA to the gold medal. In the gold medal game against Korea, she put up a solid 16, 11, and 5 to secure USA women's basketball's first ever gold medal in her own backyard of Los Angeles. Returning to USC as a junior in the 84-85 season, she was already the most decorated women's basketball player of all time. Another 2 years of dominant play at the collegiate level was going to solidify her as the greatest player ever. How do you follow up 2 national championships, a player of the year, and a gold medal? just by going out and having one of the most dominant college seasons any one individual has ever had. You don't think she can get any better, but in 1985, she went 26 points a game, 16 rebounds, 4 steals, and almost 3 blocks a game on her way to a second straight Naismith National Player of the Year and the Wade Trophy given to the best upperclassman women's hooper. But with the McGee twins now graduated, the overall team performance slipped and they lose in the Sweet 16 to Long Beach State. But despite their early tournament loss, Cheryl Miller's 1985 season is still one of the greatest in college basketball history. As a senior, it was basketball fans' last chance to see Cheryl Miller play for the women of Troy in person and cement her legacy as the greatest women's player of all time. This was also the last chance to get one more championship banner hung in the rafters, and it was going to be hard denying this USC team a chance at redemption after losing early in the tournament in the previous year. The 85-86 season saw the Trojans go 27-4 during the regular season, as Cheryl put up 25 points on 60% shooting, 12 boards, 4 steals, and 2.5 blocks a game. During the tournament that year, they blow out every opponent they faced by a win margin of about 18.5 points a game as they climb their way back up to the national championship game against the #1 seed Texas Longhorns. But Texas would absolutely turn the tables and blow out USC by 16 in the last official game Cheryl Miller would ever play. The now 4-time All-American and 3-time National Player of the Year's college career was over, and she was widely considered the best to ever play. In 1986, there was no WNBA, and every other women's professional league in the United States that existed had either folded or was completely unstable. Her best option was to play overseas, but before she could showcase her talent anywhere post-college, she suffered a career-ending ACL injury during a pickup game against NBA players. The greatest player of all time wasn't going to play professionally, something that was truly stolen from the basketball world and easily one of the biggest what-ifs in the history of the sport. In another life, we would have gotten to see a truly prime Cheryl Miller advance the game in ways that others after her ended up doing. But instead of lying down and giving up basketball for good, she made an impact in other ways to grow the women's game. After graduating in 1986, she couldn't stay away from USC too long, as she'd become an assistant under head coach Linda Sharp and then Mary Ann Stanley. She'd leave USC for a couple years in 1991 to start her career as a television analyst, but in 1993, she'd be named the 3rd ever head coach for the women of Troy. As a head coach, she'd have 2 future Basketball Hall of Famers on her roster, as Lisa Leslie and Tina Thompson led the new generation of USC women's basketball. Miller would only coach USC for 2 seasons, but she would make 2 NCAA tournament appearances, including an Elite 8 run after a 26-4 1994 season. Despite her love for USC women's basketball, she would resign as head coach in 1995 after she felt the school wasn't investing enough in the program. They were far removed from their dominant days of the 1980s, and her interest had really become to move towards broadcasting. But that didn't mean her heart still wasn't in coaching. But before she began her coaching career in the pros, the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame came calling. In 1995, Cheryl Miller was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame, an insane feat to have never played a single game of professional basketball. But if anyone had the honor and the argument to do so, it was Miller. As the WNBA would play its first season in 1997, the Phoenix Mercury hired Cheryl Miller as their first ever head coach. She would immediately have the Mercury positioned as one of the best teams in the upstart league, prioritizing physical play and elite defense, making their first finals appearance in 1998 against the Houston Comets. While she was establishing herself as one of the best coaches in the league, her class of 1986 USC teammate Cynthia Cooper was busy being the WNBA's best player and leading the Houston Comets. They were the same exact age, but in completely different places in their basketball careers. Cooper would get the best of her former USC teammate and defeat the Mercury in the 1998 finals, and for Miller, that would be her peak as a professional head coach. She'd coached 2 more seasons in the W before resigning, with her main reason being fatigue. If you didn't get to grow up and watch Cheryl Miller play and coach at USC, or even coach in the WNBA, you almost definitely saw her as an analyst at some point. She had really shown an interest in commentating throughout her career, dabbling at different networks and doing work at the 1994 Goodwill Games. But back in 1995, after leaving USC, she joined Turner Sports as an analyst and sideline reporter, where she would have another groundbreaking moment in basketball. In November of 1996, she became the first woman to ever call a nationally televised NBA game, and even served as an analyst for both men's and women's basketball at the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta. Miller's impact on the game was going to go far beyond the court, as after she resigned from coaching in the WNBA, she'd go on to work for Turner Sports until 2013. She was even joined by her little brother at the network after his own retirement in 2005. Her heart was always in the college game, so in 2014, she took a head coaching job at Langston University, an HBCU in Oklahoma that competes at the NAIA level. It would be huge for any school to get a coach of that magnitude, but for a small school to have the greatest women's player of all time as their head coach, it was a big deal. And she was truly invested in the program, coaching them to a top 10 NAIA season in 2014. But 2 years later, she'd be on the move again and back in the NCAA, this time at the D2 level at Cal State LA. Back home in Los Angeles, this will be Miller's final coaching stop, for now at least, as her tenure with the Golden Eagles would last from 2016 to 2019. Since 2019, Cheryl Miller has enjoyed her time away from basketball, occasionally making a podcast appearance, a regular attendee at USC women's basketball games, and most recently, coaching the WNBA All-Stars in 2024. Despite her career ending almost 40 years ago and never playing pro, she's still widely considered the greatest women's basketball player ever. From what she did on the court to her analyst career and even her different stints as a coach, women's basketball made so much progress behind Cheryl Miller. Basketball fans were really robbed of a Cheryl Miller pro career with her injuries, and with the WNBA being founded an entire decade after she was done playing, who knows what the league's history would look like had it been around just a bit earlier. But something most people can agree on is that she is a basketball trailblazer and a figure in the sport that genuinely changed the game. My name is Caleb. If you want to support the channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.